Welcome to Litigation Nation. I'm your host, Danessa Watkins, here with my co-host, Jack Sanker. We are back from a short hiatus to bring you some of the latest, greatest, most exciting legal news from across the country. Jack, what are you going to talk about today?
We're talking tariffs. What are they? The new ones that the Trump administration has just recently, as of yesterday, handed down. What power exactly does the president have to do this? Why are they important? And what type of businesses are going to be affected, and what can those businesses do about the tariffs?
All right. And I'm going to cover the defamation lawsuit that is currently rocking the music industry. This is Drake's claims against his record label for promoting and publishing Kendrick Lamar's diss track against him, Not Like Us.
Among other things.
Among other things, yes. As a reminder, we come out with shows every 2 weeks, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. So with that, let's kick it off. Here's what you need to know.
So we're going to start by talking about tariffs. And I promise that this show is not going to be a beat-by-beat coverage of everything that the Trump administration does. I think that would kind of goes against the mission of the show and would get pretty boring pretty quick. But there is a lot to talk about. And the good news for us is that the man does make it easy for content creators. So we are going to be talking about the new tariffs just handed down by the White House today. What are they? First of all, what power does the president have to actually do these things? Why are they important? And then businesses that I think you can reasonably project that are going to be affected by these tariffs, what can they do in their everyday business practices to protect themselves from some of the downsides? So we'll start with the tariffs. When I say the tariffs, what are we talking about here? For this, I'm going to rely on a couple of recent publications, but in particular, I'll shout out one of our partners at the firm, Gosun Funkin. We are recording this today on February 13th, 2025, and as recently as February 10th, February 11th, President Trump announced additional tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. So going to Gosung's recent article that was posted on our website, AmundsenDavislaw.com, I'm getting a lot of this information from there. What are the tariffs? Effective March 12th, so coming up, all steel and aluminum imports to the United States are going to be subject to a new increased tariff. This tariff is going to be 25%, which is an increase from 10%. This is for steel and aluminum imports, like I suppose those raw materials, but also derivative articles, which would include widgets, items like that contain steel and aluminum. Derivative articles, only the steel or aluminum portion will be subject to these tariffs. And as we record today, actually a couple hours ago when I was putting together my notes for the show today, Trump also announced reciprocal tariffs on all other countries. And this would include the value-added tax, the VAT tax in the EU. So all these are in addition to the tariffs from about a month ago, the flat tariffs that were announced against Mexico and Canada, some of which have been walked back. And also those against China, etc. So this portion of the podcast today, if your supply chain relies on international imports of any kind, and many do, my practice area in particular, which construction, is going to be hit hard. And I'm not saying this is a political statement. There are plenty of Trump supporters in my industry who are not happy about this. And what you can expect to see in terms of shortages and price hikes as a result of these tariffs. So what are the president's powers with respect to tariffs? Kind of a brief history there. Most of it, I actually didn't know this, is statutory. It's not directly coming from the Constitution. I just kind of assumed, because my entire life the president has dabbled with this stuff, and I never really looked into it. But most of the tariff power that we see discussed in terms of a new administration comes in, announces a new policy or whatever, it's power that was expressly delegated to the executive by Congress. over the past 100 years. I had no idea.
Like once they delegate it at some point in time, it just stays in place?
Well, they passed a law that's never been revoked or,
Right.
or overturned. So there's the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which is being relied on for these new steel and aluminum tariffs. It unilaterally allows the president to hike tariffs based on the first thing they have to do is get a recommendation from the Secretary of Commerce, which is a position that's appointed by the president and can you can easily put a yes person in there. Secretary of Commerce has to recommend it first that the importation of an item is deemed to, quote, threaten or impair national security. Once you have that recommendation, the president can go ahead and do what he wants with tariffs. And this has actually happened. I remember in 2018, Trump imposed the original 10% tariff on steel, and they've remained 10% until now. Now they're 25%. But this.
When was it? You said the act was in 1962?
Yes, 1960.
Did you see what the original purpose of that delegation was? What was going on at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was dealing with the Kennedy administration's kind of global trade negotiations that that JFK was doing at the time with I don't remember exactly, but you think of NAFTA or one of these big trade deals or whatever. The Kennedy administration was doing that, I think, with Western Europe, and as a way to get the president the power to unilaterally negotiate on those terms, Congress passed this version of the Trade Expansion Act.
Got it.
There was another one. There's been a few. There's one from 1930. There's one from 1974, and there's been some tweaks around the edges from Congress all the while. But it's a pretty broad delegation of congressional power. The Constitution kind of unambiguously gives this tariff power to Congress. Article 1, Section 8 says the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect dues, duties, imposts, and excises. But all dues, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. And then there's a separate part of the Constitution which bars the states from doing their own import tariffs, which would be Article 1, Section 10. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties on exports or imports except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws. So by and large, it's been interpreted to mean that tariffs are under the express purview of Congress. But again, they've delegated it via statute to the president, mostly, seems like for geopolitical reasons over the years. So the 1962 Trade Expansion Act is the basis for this current round of tariff hikes on the grounds that the steel and aluminum imports that are usually coming from China in this case are deemed a quote-unquote threat to national security. If that seems like a stretch to you, it doesn't matter because it's already been challenged and upheld when Trump did it the first time around in 2018. So by all accounts, he's allowed to do this. And, I'm sure folks will challenge it again on different grounds, whatever. But, this is not outside the bounds of, permitted executive action at this point. So I mentioned the 1974 Trade Act that kind of expanded the presidential power. And I relied on an article published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies in October of 2024 for kind of the Cliffs Notes of on some of this legislation. And I thought that the delegation of congressionally enumerated powers to the president via statute was, worth mentioning in this discussion in light of some of the renewed interest in, congressional delegation of power, like we've covered in the past, like the overturning of the Chevron doctrine, for example. And you see every day now in the news complaints about the administrative states, which is, in one way or another, a delegation of congressional authority to the, bureaucratic blob or whatever you want to call it. So this is another example of that, by the way, of delegation of power, but it's already been upheld by the courts. I think it's going to be fine. Why is this important? If you haven't already thought about this or don't know, it is because it's going to undoubtedly, in the short to medium term, raise the price on, things that are imported in the United States. 8.5. So, for example, the tariffs on Canadian imports, which they were paused and then they're maybe coming back or whatever. Set that aside. Assume that they're in effect now. $8.5 billion of wood products are imported into the United States in 2023. Of that $8.5 billion, like $5.8 billion comes from Canada, right? So 70% of wood products that come into the U.S. is coming from Canada and would now be subject to a 25% tariff that is going to be passed to the consumer one way or the other. Right. Whether in forms of shortages because people can't afford to import it, or price hikes because the importers have to absorb that price and someone's going to pay it. The other example would be $456 million worth of lime and gypsum, which is imported from all over the world, but most of which comes from Mexico. Of that $456 million, $352 million comes from Mexico, 71%. So that's subject to 25% taxes. And these are the tariffs that are put on those two countries specifically, not the steel and aluminum ones, but you get the idea. Mm-hmm. Regarding the steel and aluminum tariffs, it's causing a big reaction from the folks in my world, construction developers, builders, things like that. These are obviously critical construction materials. And you're seeing a lot of folks that probably were otherwise, aligned with a lot of the Trump policy agenda that are, that don't like this, right? So, for example, the chairman of the National Association of Home Builders said just today, the administration's move to impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum products imports into the United States runs totally counter to, parenthetical, a previously stated goal of lowering housing costs. By raising home building costs, deterring new developments, and frustrating efforts to rebuild in the wake of natural disasters. Ultimately, consumers will pay for these tariffs in the form of higher home prices, unquote. So the costs are expected to be raised by like several $1 billion for the construction industry generally. And that's, going to be priced into the decision whether you want to take on a new project, of course, whether I can afford to build my new building or hospital or house or whatever it is. But also of the many hundreds of thousands of ongoing projects that these materials don't get bought all at once. Like if you're building a skyscraper, you are purchasing materials along the way. And what happens when the price of those materials goes up?
Mm-hmm. And you've already negotiated your contract.
Correct. Yeah. So there's ways, folks that are listening that are in the industry know this. The contracts that are typically used do account for these types of things generally, right? You can do, there's change order provisions. There's force majeure clauses, different contingencies, allowance provisions, things like that. What's interesting is that most of these types of price adjustment provisions that are in really all kinds of contracts, but I'm talking more specific to construction contracts here. It's coming from AIA form documents. AIA is like, it's been publishing boilerplate contracts that you can buy and incorporate into whatever you're using for like 130 years. And the AIA is like, it's most trade groups rely on the AIA for, my boilerplate contract for X, Y, and Z. They've been vetted, they've been litigated, lawyers have looked at them for years. Mm-hmm. They revise them as the courts rule on different provisions. It's kind of like the easy but also really good way to get yourself whatever contract documents you need. The AIA does not have contractual provisions available, that would deal with the unexpected price swings happening to materials during the course of ongoing construction as a result of like executive action. So arguably, a lot of the things I mentioned earlier, like the force majeure clauses, how you can deal with things over change orders, things like that, is not going to be applicable here if you're a supplier or a builder or a subcontractor who all of a sudden, can't procure or has to pay through the nose to procure materials that you would need to do your contract. There's nothing like boilerplate that's available. Mm-hmm. What that means for for these folks is that you're going to have to either eat the costs. So if you're in an ongoing project, you sign the contract, you're kind of screwed, right? Unless you can, renegotiate, and often you can, but
probably depends on how far you're into the work.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, but it's going to eat up everyone's margins, and it puts a lot of them in a tough spot. And I'm already getting like phone calls about this. So it's we have builders who are like, I don't even know if I can begin work on this because I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the tariffs were announced this week. Prices have already. You've seen manufacturing companies put up statements of like, we're going to increase our prices, but like not everyone's done that. So you don't know where it hits you on the supply chain yet.
And just out of curiosity, because the whole tariffs thing is kind of new, when these are put in place, is there any sense of an end date, or is it just, I don't know.
It's a good question because some of the statutory empowerment of the executive to increase tariffs is time limited. Like I want to say it's 150 days for certain things. I do not believe that the quote unquote national security justification that's being used here has a time limit.
Okay.
So it's like it's in place as long as the president, wants it to be in place.
Yeah. Okay.
And can either walk it back, or you get a new president or whatever. So if you're in the middle of a project, this is a problem. We're already seeing it. But if you're contemplating bidding on a job or developing something or whatever, what you need to be doing, and you're not going to be able to just pull from your library of AIA contracts to properly protect yourself. Unfortunately, you're going to have to effectively get custom language added by an attorney in the form of what we would call price escalation clauses. And these are similar to contingencies, but they kind of allow for a greater range of like triggering events. Like it doesn't have to be a hurricane, for example, or anything like that. You have to agree on what that triggering event is going to be. And what we've seen people, we saw people do this in 2018 with the initial steel tariffs, was adding price escalation clauses into their contracts, which can be triggered by like an agreed upon price hike.
Okay.
So like, your and you would agree upon a price hike as measured by like a reliable authority. Like what I've seen is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They publish the Producer Price Index, the PPI, which can tell you, whether the price of something has gone up by a certain percent over a certain amount of time. And you can reference that in a contract and say, like, if the price of steel goes up 10%, we are going to, typically you see cost sharing then. So like, is the subcontractor that is expected to bring the materials to the project beyond a certain point of price, you can build into your contract, we're going to share that new added costs, between ourselves and the owner, or between ourselves and the general, or however you want to do it. So like what I've seen and what I think people are going to do is include price escalation terms that'll trigger if the price of steel increases by like 10% or so, as measured by PPI. That's where we kind of foresee this going in terms of, builders on the ground and what they're going to do about this. But it ultimately introduces quite a bit of volatility because we also, we just saw the tariffs get walked back immediately.
Right, yeah.
So like you raise your prices and then do you lower them? Stuff like that. So
that is interesting.
If you have buying power, do you buy extra and hoard it? Like it's just, we saw what supply chain ripples do to the economy during COVID, and which to some extent was unavoidable. Mm-hmm. And this is like kind of intentional. So so we'll see. Is kind of where I'll end this at. But there are ways to protect yourself. So you just aren't going to be able to rely on business as usual with respect to these new supply chain issues.
I mean, the contractors' issues is one thing, and obviously they'll have some negotiating power, I would imagine. But I hadn't even thought about the like what just happened in LA and all the fires.
Yeah.
And, like all of those families now trying to rebuild, or insurance companies or whatever, is this going to increase all of our insurance as a result too?
100%. I mean, right. Like the raw materials that go into new construction go up, then like the cost of the rebuild goes up. And I mean, potentially the value of your property goes up then because the resale value is higher. Because there's less housing being built because it's more expensive. So you pay more property taxes. I mean, like it's a lot of downstream effects here. And I would posit that we were not in a great shape in this country broadly in terms of housing construction anyways. And this is going to, at least in the short to medium term, going to exacerbate, I think, a lot of those problems. But that's what we got to deal with. So for those of you listening that have concerns, talk to your lawyer.
And we have a great construction team.
Yeah, talk to your lawyer or talk to me. Give me a call.
All right, now moving on to the top defamation lawsuit in the country right now, I would argue. Yep. Well, if you haven't heard, there is a current claim being brought by Aubrey Drake Graham, better known as Drake, against UMG Recordings, Inc., which is a record label that he has been part of for, I think, over a decade now, that was just filed in the Southern District of New York. Now, to go back a little bit about what this case is about, in case you haven't been, following anything social media-wise for a while, back in, I want to say it was April, maybe March of 2024, there was a feud that broke out between Kendrick Lamar Duckworth, better known as Kendrick Lamar, and Drake. And it began when Drake and J. Cole, another artist, released a track where Cole had crowned himself, Drake, and Lamar as the big three of rap. Lamar later put out he was a guest verse on a track by Future and Metro Boomin's song Like That, and he claimed, "No to the big three, it's just me." Over several weeks after that, Lamar and Drake released several diss tracks against one another. There were accusations by Drake against Lamar that he was a domestic abuser. He had implied that one of Lamar's children was fathered by one of his close friends. And then Lamar shot back at Drake, calling him a pedophile and a colonizer exploiting hip-hop culture. So all of this happened pretty quickly and escalated pretty quickly and actually resulted in, I guess, your classic feud of people weighing in on both sides, people trying to substantiate certain claims.
This was so exciting, by the way.
It was.
I was so into this when it happened. I was like, I could not wait for the next salvo.
And sometimes you only had to wait a matter of an hour or something, and the next one came out. Like it was boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So things turned dark for Drake soon after that. He received a lot of hate mail. I'll get into some of the violence that escalated thereafter. But then in September, I believe it was actually September 7th of 2024, Lamar announced that he was performing at the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show.
Yes.
Which I think caused Drake and his legal team to kind of kick into high gear a little bit.
Is there reference to the Amazon Prime event in any of the pleadings?
There might have been.
Because he did that absurd... I mean, it was so cool.
I think, yes, it was. Yeah. So the complaint is 81 pages long, and I did read a lot of it, but there were some parts that... Yeah.
The Amazon Prime live concert that he did, in which he performed the infamous Not Like Us.
Not Like Us, yeah.
I think 6 times in a row. And
Yes, it was, yeah.
And by the end, half the NBA was on stage dancing with him, and I was just like, this is...
Yeah.
I don't know how you come back from this, Drake. I don't know.
Right. No, it was a little bit tough to watch at times, but I mean the song is pretty catchy, so there's that. Eventually Drake did end up reaching out to UMG. I don't know that he ever reached out to Kendrick Lamar's team. I think he was just focused on the record label. And there was some pre-suit litigation matters that I'll get to, but finally, on January 15th of 2025, so 3 weeks before the Super Bowl, Drake did, in fact, file an 81-page complaint in New York solely against UMG Recordings, Inc. Now, that is currently pending. I did look up the docket, and I saw that UMG is scheduled to respond to that complaint. They already said they're filing a motion to dismiss by March 17th. So I think that briefing will probably be finished up in April or May, so we should have an update.
He has not sued Kendrick.
Has not sued Kendrick, which I think probably some people in the public are kind of confused about that and why he made that choice. You think of defamation, it's the person speaking, which is Kendrick. But no, he went after UMG, and I will explain why.
There you go.
So I just want to start with the introduction of this complaint. Now, people, do take some creativity with complaints, but generally it's just paragraph 1, paragraph 2, pretty, standard. This complaint, I would say, coming from my world, is kind of like a work of art.
Cool.
There are photos in there. There's graphics. There's exhibits, and the introduction.
You're breaking all the local rules. You're not allowed to do that.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe New York is a little bit more flowery with their pleadings.
That would get stricken in our jurisdiction.
Yes. Yeah. So he starts with this quote in bold and italics by Sir Lucian Grange, who is the chief executive officer of UMG. And he allegedly made this quote, not even allegedly, I've seen it in the pleadings. He made it on March 25th of 2024. So within a year of filing this lawsuit, the CEO says, quote, "A single lie can destroy a reputation of integrity. And while it takes years to build a reputation, it can be ruined in 5 minutes." Then the complaint starts right off with this paragraph. In the middle of the night on May 7, 2024, an armed group of assailants drove up to the Toronto house in which Drake and his family resided. Drake was inside. The car stopped in front of the residence. Someone yelled, "Fuck Drake," and at least one gunman began to open fire. One bullet went through the security gate and hit Drake's front door. Another bullet struck and wounded a security guard who was also one of Drake's friends. While the car drove away, Drake and others in the house summoned help for the security guard and did everything possible to keep him alive. During the nearly 30 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive, Drake and others labored to keep the man alive by applying pressure to the gunshot wound with towels. Blood was everywhere.
That's actually, I knew there was like the shooting, but I didn't know. Oh, man.
I know. I didn't know it was that serious. It continues. After the security guard arrived at the hospital, surgeons, plural, worked quickly to remove the bullet, stop the bleeding, and save his life, though it took days for his condition to stabilize. Thankfully, the security guard survived. The very next day, May 8, 2024, a different intruder used his bare hands to dig a hole under the security fence surrounding Drake's Toronto house. He managed to dig deep enough to squeeze through and enter Drake's property. Fortunately, Drake's home security guards caught him before he was able to cause any physical harm, although the trespasser managed to yell racist slurs and threats against Drake before being escorted off the property.
Jesus.
On May 9th, 2024, the very next day, another break-in attempt happened. In the 2 decades leading up to May of 2024, although Drake was constantly in the public eye, nothing remotely like these events had ever happened to him or his family. But these events were not coincidental. They immediately followed and were proximately caused by UMG's actions leading up to and on May 4, 2024. End quote. What a way to start a complaint.
Yeah.
Setting the grounds for all of the damage and fear that he claims he's still enduring today, and puts all the blame on UMG.
Well, that's interesting that he's got what I would say concrete damages,
for sure.
there, which is usually a little wishy-washy when it comes to this type of complaint.
Right.
Yeah.
So everyone, I think, it was kind of like, all right, why are you going after a record label? That seems a little odd. Obviously, when someone puts out music, it's, there are a lot of people involved. It's not just the record label that are promoting this. However, Drake is claiming that UMG took actions that exceeded what they would have done in normal circumstances, cause it unprecedented steps to, for example, remove the recording's copyright restrictions on YouTube, thereby whitelisting the recording to ensure that content creators would republish it broadly. Some of these claims are on information and belief, but say that
you're talking about Kendrick Lamar songs or Drake songs?
No, sorry, the Not Like Us Kendrick Lamar song. So UMG took these actions that were totally outside of the norm just for this particular song. And Drake's argument is that they did that because, well, for money purposes, but also they understood at all times the harm that it was going to cause.
Yeah.
He claims that the agents within UMG put a thumb on the scale by offering financial incentives to third parties, trying to up the streams on platforms. They were using bots and then would...
they do that.
I was going to say
that's every... Yeah. Didn't we cover this about the guy who was making millions in royalties from Spotify by making AI-generated music and then making AI bots listen to it?
Yeah.
And that's like... Okay, he actually just invented the music industry's model from 2030. That is just going to... Right.
Yeah.
They do this. The record labels do this, by the way, allegedly. Ooh.
Allegedly. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it's like... been proven, and that's why I think a lot of these claims are upon information and belief. So before he filed this lawsuit, he did file two, I guess, pre-litigation actions in state court, one in New York and one in Texas, where he was trying to essentially get discovery on all of this and what tactics they were using to try and bolster his claims.
Okay. So it'd be like an RID in our...
Yeah.
In Illinois.
Yeah.
Respondent in discovery.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us has certainly shattered records. It received 5 Grammy nominations. Within a week of its initial release, the track garnered 96 million streams, which broke the record for the most streamed song over a 7-day period. And then on October 7th of last year, it broke another record with the most weeks at number 1 on Billboard's Hot Rap Songs at 21 weeks. So, I mean, we're not, this whole idea of rap battles is not anything that's new to us. However, for a diss track to gain this much publicity, and I think that's, just sets a new standard for sure.
Yeah.
So all of this, Drake alleges, culminated in UMG making the most egregious step of using its leverage, their professional connections, etc., to make sure that Kendrick was able to be the Super Bowl halftime performer. I'm not sure if that allegation was actually made on information and belief, because I'm not sure how that he's going to have that information, but
sure.
Either way. We'll get into how that played out in a minute. But as far as damages, Drake is claiming that UMG's intentional conduct destroyed his reputation, that listeners believe Kendrick Lamar's lyrics to be truthful. So Drake has just received an avalanche of online hate mail. As we mentioned in the beginning, it's escalated to the violent intrusions on his home. He's had to pull his son out of elementary school in Toronto and arrange.
Really sad.
That part is definitely devastating.
The other parts are also sad, but
yeah. But I mean, once it affects the kids, actually, he had his son and his mother leave the city entirely just for fear of their safety. I also saw, and this is in the complaint too, but I had noticed it before. So when UMG published the recordings on all these different platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, et cetera, they added this accompanying image, and anyone that listens to or views that stream, they're going to see this image, and it's an aerial view of Drake's Toronto home, covered in the icons that are used in the public safety apps like Citizen that would identify child sex offender residences.
That was the album art for the single.
Right,
Kendrick
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, that whole thing back and forth was obviously it escalated to a point that's too far, but don't even get me started on what was happening, and it was a series of escalating allegations between each other, and Drake said things about. I feel like let me explain rap to you. Like
right,
but
right.
he like said things about like Kendrick's family
Right.
and like all that stuff, and
it wasn't one-sided.
Yeah, that's the best way to say it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, it was definitely going back and forth. But Drake has said that UMG's actions made this situation rise to the level of Pizzagate. Is actually what he.
That's a good comparison.
Says. Yeah, which I'm sure most people are familiar, but that was the conspiracy that went viral, I think, back in the 2016 election, presidential election, where there were claims that the New York Police Department discovered a pedophile ring that was linked to Democrats. We heard all about Anthony Weiner's emails, Hillary Clinton's emails.
Well, Weiner's emails were real.
Right, yes.
That was not a conspiracy.
True.
The man has an issue.
Yes, no doubt. But it obviously led to a lot of, hate mail and threats and backlash and whatnot. So, yeah, that's what Drake is saying, that all of this, they were clear lies based on their decade, I think at least a decade, of knowing Drake. UMG knew that these were false claims being made by Kendrick Lamar, and yet they still did everything in their power to make this song successful. All right. Now, the claims that are actually brought. So, count one is a claim of defamation per se. And Drake admits, as he must, that he's a public figure. So, he has to show that UMG acted with actual malice. So, under the First Amendment protections, actual malice kind of means something different. It means that he has to show that UMG published false statements about Drake, knowing the statements were false or with reckless disregard for their truth. And he, again, just intends to substantiate this claim by citing to his longstanding history with UMG. I mean, there is such a thing as republisher liability.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah, so...
Because they're not the speaker here.
Right. So if you know if I knew that you published something that was false and I can't bury my head in the sand. Mm-hmm. I also can't just freely republish it and say, oh, I was relying on Jack. No, there is such a thing as republisher liability. This is just such a unique situation because they're not actually saying Kendrick's words. You know what I mean? Like they're just allowing the song to be played. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and then he would say like maliciously amplifying it.
Right.
And doing other things like that to make sure it reached boosting it, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't. I mean, the decision not to sue Kendrick directly has got to be for like PR reasons, because that's like kind of like a in this world of like grudges and like almost like an honor culture type situation. It would be like a lame move to do that, to like have probably be accused of picking a fight with him to begin with, and then to sue him for defamation. After, like notwithstanding that this escalated to something violent and nasty after the fact. So that's my explanation for like why he didn't sue Kendrick.
It's clear that he was trying, like just reading the complaint, I think it's clear that Drake was trying to find some common ground with other artists. It's easy to point at, the record label. He's obviously not the first musician to do that, to actually record labels have been sued all the time for mistreating their artists, but not for the lyrics of another artist. This is a different spin on it. So I think you're right. He probably knew it was going to be career suicide to sue a fellow artist, but he's kind of doing that anyways, like just through...
Suing them for what?
Right.
For publishing the song that everyone knows?
Right.
Yeah. The Super Bowl halftime song?
Yeah. Okay, let me just wrap up real quick. So the other claims he's bringing are harassment in the second degree, saying that UMG published and promoted through a coordinated campaign to smear, threaten, and discredit Drake, despite Drake's protests. So I guess he did reach out to them initially and try to, I don't know what he was trying to do, if he was trying to negotiate a settlement or get them to stop so widely promoting it. I think this was before they had announced that Kendrick was going to be the halftime show at the Super Bowl. But either way, UMG pretty much said, go pound sand.
There was a lot of behind the back, like, legal maneuvering during this feud process. Before this song, like, I remember, for example, Drake had released a song as part of, like, the many, like, songs that they released during this time that was using AI reconstructed voices for, like, Tupac and Snoop Dogg. And I mean, allegedly, like, Kendrick and his quote unquote people, like, led the charge on getting the like, copyright action threatened for that or whatever. And
right.
there was like, this stuff was happening. I want to say there was probably a lot of cease and desist letters that were happening before this, probably before that song came out. Like, you know, it wasn't, this probably was not the first time either one of them consulted with an attorney.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. But it was all probably more hush-hush behind the scenes. And then the third cause of action was violation of New York General Business Law, Section 349. And this is where it goes into the covert actions that UMG was allegedly using, like bots, you know, streaming the recording on Spotify and then touting the number of streams that they were getting. There's also some allegations of paying a radio promoter to engage in pay-for-play. Again, I don't know that this is, like, a shocker that this happens, but either way, he's throwing those claims at them. So, you know, I think Drake, I don't want to say he stepped in it here, but I don't see his community backing him up in any way, shape, or form on this. Again, this is just these, you know, these feuds going back and forth between artists. It's nothing new, and it's something that Drake himself has engaged in long before this particular instance. And I don't know, UMG could try to argue, you know, some sort of, like, clean hands defense. Like, Drake, we've supported you through your own diss tracks for how many decades, you know, and now because it gets turned on you in such a way.
That's very interesting.
And they don't have control over Kendrick's listeners. Like, maybe his fans are just more vigilant. You know, is that their fault? I don't know. I
mean, this thing took on, like, a life of its own, like, on social media and everything. Like, it was, I mean, people were, like, waiting, you know, like, for the next thing to happen. Like, it was like a tidal wave of attention and everything else, which is, like, going to be, sure, like, algorithmically boosted by, but everyone involved, you know, like, I'm positive that Kendrick Lamar has tweeted, like, 10 times in the past 10 years, right? Like, 5 of those tweets were him dropping these 5 diss tracks. And it was, like, the number one thing, like, trending thing on Twitter. Like, I'm sure that the Twitter algorithm was like, this is important, let's boost this. So, like, everyone is in the attention game here and, like, would have, you know, done their part at every piece of the attention-sucking supply chain to boost this whole conflict, including, I would imagine, Drake songs, you know?
Right.
So, like, to your point, like, there's going to be some element of, like, tit for tat, unclean hands that I imagine gets litigated as well.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I always take it to, like, the extent of, like, what does this mean going forward? And, you know, are we going to, as lawyers, start requiring artists to make a disclaimer, like, this is art? Or, you know.
I mean, I also think, you know, he probably had, you know, correctly assumed that if he would have sued Kendrick would have countersued.
Yeah.
And then you're, like, doing discovery about all the nasty claims they made about each other, which, you know, which would be damaging, I would think, for...
Yeah, but ultimately, if you are a defamation plaintiff, like, that is what you're inviting.
Right.
You know, you're opening the door into your reputation. So if this case doesn't get dismissed, of course, UMG is going to be, you know, going into all of that discovery. At the end of the day, this was a very public rap battle between two people who had platforms, to say what they needed to say, to do it in an artistic way or not. But, Kendrick just fired back over and over and ended up with the chart topper. And, Drake had an opportunity to come back and didn't. Instead, he ran to the court. So,
I mean, he got his house shot up, though. I mean, that's the...
True.
That's the...
I'm not trying to belittle that, of course.
Right.
But
I mean, this was like, not to belittle it, but like, this is the nature of this kind of game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like very famously like Tupac and Biggie and like
right.
all of that stuff. Like this, like it was, I mean, it's ridiculous that like this type of music, like music feud, can escalate to this type of like in real life violence, right?
Yeah.
Like that shouldn't happen, but like it frequently does.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both of them are guilty of like making express threats of physical violence in their music.
Right.
Like both of them, so many words said like, I will shoot you, I will hurt you, know, whatever.
Don't come to my town, you won't leave alive or something.
Yeah,
like that.
So, and that's just like part of it. And
mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how that plays out. Like, cause I don't know what the defense is then, because it's like, it's not like an assumption of risk, but it's like, you knew what you were getting yourself into.
It's going to be interesting to read their motion to dismiss. We'll have to, report more on that because I'm interested to see what they're going to do because it's not the summary judgment stage, so it's not like they can put forth all of this evidence showing no, we didn't in fact, or challenge Drake to show the evidence that they took these covert actions to inflate the popularity of this. So it's going to have to be just pure legal arguments that you cannot hold us liable for defamation.
Yeah, I mean, so it's defamation, then it's a harassment, which are
mm-hmm.
distinct, and that's interesting because the defamation involves like, central claim is that I am not the thing that I was accused of being, which is I could say a pedophile, right?
Yeah.
He has to take that affirmative duty on and prove that
mm-hmm.
For his case to succeed. The harassment, not so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a separate tort that can be proven without necessarily getting into the veracity of the statement.
Yeah, no, that's more about their actions in promoting. Yeah, in promoting the music, promoting that song in particular. So yeah, I mean, we'll see how that plays out, and we'll report more on it. I did get a lot of questions from friends about, oh my gosh, what happens post Super Bowl, and like what impact is that going to have? I mean, look, Kendrick Lamar is not a defendant in this case, so.
But I'm sure that because he didn't say it.
He didn't say the word.
Didn't say it at the Super Bowl,
yes.
And I'm sure that.
I think the entire crowd said.
Yeah.
Definitely said A minor.
Yeah,
but I don't know if they said. I'm sure they said.
But I'm sure that when they were like, hey. You can't say it. You can't say it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, right. Like, you can't, obviously, so you can't, like, use, like, certain profanity, right? Like, that's accepted.
Yeah.
And I've, separate to that, I'm sure they were like, you also can't do this because we do not want to be dragged into this lawsuit,
We being who?
Maybe Apple Music that produced the Super Bowl halftime show. Maybe the NFL. I mean,
mm-hmm.
It for the same reasons that the label got sued.
If we're taking this republication stance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. If that theory has merit, it would be, I think, equally applicable to, like why did he get the job in the first place? Because he had this hit song and this hit album this year, which is about Drake being a pedophile. So like
just happens to be about.
So like you can't separate one from the other.
Right.
Like,
mm-hmm.
And so they're like, you put the guy who calls me a pedophile on your stage and watched him call me a pedophile again.
Mm-hmm.
Like that would be, that would, I think would hook you into whatever.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I wonder if maybe he'll see how the lawsuit with UMG plays out first,
mm-hmm.
and then possibly amend or bring in a whole another suit. I mean, if anything, the Super Bowl just increased his damages,
100%.
So,
it's another element that's very interesting too, because like, again, like the harassment part, I'm sure he's going to be able to credibly claim some type of, I guess, like emotional, psychological damages for like, you know, watching a guy get shot, for example. Like that's, you know, that's like recoverable damage, you know. But the reputational harm is where the money's at, right? Mm-hmm. And like he went from being like Drake to, I mean, I'm sure he'll be fine. Don't get me wrong. But for at least some time, a like pariah. Yeah. And like fairly or unfairly, you know, whatever you want to, you know. So those damages are tremendous because I think he was a billionaire. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think that it's a defense to say you made it worse. It's not. I don't think it is not a defense to say you made it worse by filing this lawsuit. But the reality is, he may have made it worse by filing this lawsuit.
Well, he may have harmed his own reputation more so. But you mention this all the time when you talk about defamation cases. Like that's a part of it.
Right.
Like,
right.
You can't defend your character without putting your character at stake.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a. Yeah, I'm sure there was a large cost-benefit analysis that was performed prior to filing this, but I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. It's definitely one of the first of its kind, if not the first.
Well, to your point earlier, it's the first diss track that was, like, number one, you know?
Right,
Like, it doesn't... Those usually are, like, B-sides on the album.
Right.
That, you know... That
the real fans listen to over and over, but not like mainstream.
Like I mean, I remember like Jay-Z and Nas, like Ether, and that was like hard to find to listen to in its day. And I think the late '90s. Like it was not like promoted. Like it was, you know, and it was like the quintessential like diss track of its time. You know, and it was not Nas's most infamous song or you know, whatever. This is kind of a different animal.
Yeah. My husband's a big Eminem fan, so he had me sit and listen to the whole one against Machine Gun Kelly over and over again. I was like, okay, I got it.
Everyone tried getting their own beefs going after this, and no one had the juice because it was like Eminem versus Machine Gun Kelly. It's like a little one-sided. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
MGK fans. Yeah. But like, yeah, Drake and Kendrick, that was awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't want anyone to get hurt, but like,
no.
You know, I felt like after that, there was like a lot of people, there was a lot of artists who were like, airing dirty laundry about each other and like trying to catch the hype, and just none of it had the juice. like because I mean at various points like Drake like was like threatening Kendrick's family, and then Kendrick was like, you're a pedophile. Like the stakes don't get much higher than those two claims, you know. Like, you can't really one up that like I'm gonna like hurt or kill your family, like, and then it's like or then really sorry to go down this, but like the song that came out right before Not Like Us, Meet the Family, was pretty brutal, where he rapped at each individual member of...
Meet the Grams, yeah.
Sorry, Meet the Grams, yeah. Mm-hmm. He rapped at each individual member of Drake's family, and then also rapped at Drake's alleged secret daughter.
Yeah,
it was like secret daughter of Drake. Like, I'm sorry, your father is such a deadbeat. Like, it was bad. I mean, it was great, but...
Kendrick Lamar goes hard. I mean, we saw that at the Super Bowl. Like, have you watched all of those videos afterwards, tearing apart? Obviously, there was a lot of cultural and important symbolism that came out of it. But when you look at the little digs on Drake that were mixed in there too, it was like, whoa, okay.
I mean, this is not what people listen to the show for, but one of my favorite like reoccurring bits on SNL is like the end of the year. Have you seen this with Weekend Update, the end of the year?
Oh, yeah, where they
trade jokes?
Yeah.
So Colin Jost, Michael Che are the hosts of Weekend Update on SNL, and at the end of the year, their gifts to each other are jokes that they have written for each other to tell. And the running gag, one of them, is Michael Che always writes really horribly racist jokes for Colin Jost to read.
Yeah.
And that's funny. But... one of the most recent...
Funny because it's a white man.
Yes. Like, he's like, you're watching the pain on his face. He's like, I can't believe I'm being...
He's got to get pummeled for this. Yeah.
Well, and Colin Jost got him back, like this year or whatever, a couple months ago, by making Michael Che talk shit about Kendrick. And it was like he... Yeah, the joke was like, I'm Michael Che. I'm on Drake's side. I think Kendrick's a bitch. I'm announcing our beef now. And Michael Che's like visibly upset having to read this. He's like, I do not want to mess with Kendrick Lamar. Like, I do not want to do this. So, I mean, there's a lot of cultural purchase in this we'll see. Now we're boiling it down to a boring lawsuit.
Yep. No, I know. Well, we'll keep you updated and see how this one plays out.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. We're glad to be back after a short hiatus. Remember, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. We broadcast every other week, and we will talk to you soon.